use one of those pens if you don't. So we're just doing your best. It's okay if you don't know one of them. We'll come back to this at the end of the lesson. When you're done, I need you to just put it in the basket under your desk. I don't want you to put it away. We'll be getting it back out at the end of the lesson. Just put it on the floor. Okay. So what we're going to be doing today is creating a memorial to the victims of the Trail of Tears. And we'll talk more about that in a minute, but we're going to be basing this memorial off of a primary source reading. So we'll do our primary source reading a little bit differently today. Ordinarily we do our PKIC style of reading, and we'll use a couple of those elements in this reading, but we're going to be doing this together in your groups instead of individually. Alright, so this primary source is a soldier's account of the Cherokee Trail of Tears. So we're talking about the Trail of Tears. This is an account of a man who was one of the soldiers who actually removed the Native Americans and was forcing them on the Trail of Tears. His name was Private John G. Burnett, and this is his story. So a little bit of background before we get started. This is reviewing what we talked about yesterday. In May 1830, Congress passed the Indian Removal Act, which gave President Andrew Jackson the power to grant land to the west of the Mississippi River to Native American tribes in exchange for lands east of the Mississippi. The Cherokee tribe argued that the law was not constitutional, and the Supreme Court agreed. Ignoring their demands, Jackson gave the Cherokees a choice. They could leave in the next 2 years or be forcibly removed. By 1838, about 16,000 Cherokees still remained on their land. Roughly 7,000 soldiers were sent in to move the Cherokees, thus beginning the Trail of Tears. On their march west, 1/4 of the group died of cold, hunger, and disease. The U.S. soldiers were under the command of General Winfield Scott. One of Scott's soldiers, Private John G. Burnett, provided an account of the removal of the Cherokee in a letter written to his children on his 80th birthday. Okay, so that's our sourcing information. Now, if we read on down, we see that Private Burnett tells us that he was born in 1810. Okay, so if the Trail of Tears took place in 1838, how old was Private Burnett? 28. Okay, so he was about 28 years old. Okay, so he is a young man, all right? He's old enough to know right from wrong. He's old enough to know what he was doing. He's a young man. Okay, and he is telling this story in 1890. All right, so that's a really long time after the Trail of Tears happened. So what happens to your memories after a really long time?
They start to fade away.
Okay, hold on. Let's take that one at a time. Okay?
Fuzzy.
Okay, they get a little bit fuzzy. What do you think?
They start slowly going away.
Okay, so they might start slowly going away. So that makes us wonder a little bit about this primary source, right? So if there's not a whole lot of details and that sort of thing, we can understand. Now, if an event in your life is especially traumatic or bad, or especially exciting, okay, it might make you remember it more clearly. So we have to be thinking of both of those things at the same time as we're reading this source. That yes, we can probably trust him. He was there. He experienced this, or he inflicted this experience upon someone else, more correctly. But it also has been a long time. Okay, so we have to think about that as well. All right, so we are actually going to read through this. I'm going to read for us twice. The first time, I just want you to listen. I want you to picture the events in your head. I want you to just think about what you're reading along with me too. Okay? All right. Children, this is my birthday, December 11th, 1890. I am 80 years old today. I was born at King's Iron Works in Sullivan County, Tennessee, December 11th, 1810. I grew into manhood fishing in Beaver Creek and roaming through the forest, hunting the deer and the wild boar and the timber wolf. On these long hunting trips, I met many of the Cherokee Indians. We hunted together by day and slept around their campfires by night. I learned to speak their language, and they taught me the arts of tracking and building traps. The removal of the Cherokee Indians from their lifelong homes in the year of 1838 found me a young man in the prime of life and as a private soldier in the American Army. Knowing many of the Indians and able to speak their language, I was sent as an interpreter into the Smoky Mountain country in May 1838. There, I witnessed the execution of the most brutal order in the history of American warfare. I saw the helpless Cherokees arrested, dragged from their homes, and in the chill of a drizzling rain on an October morning, I saw them loaded like cattle into 645 wagons and started on a terrible journey west. One can never forget the quiet sadness of that morning. Chief John Ross prayed, and when the bugle sounded, the wagon started rolling as many of the children rose to their feet and waved their little hands goodbye to their mountain homes, knowing they were leaving them forever. Many of these helpless people did not have blankets, and many of them had been driven from home barefooted. On the morning of November 17th, we drove through a terrific sleet and snowstorm with freezing temperatures. And from that day until we reached the end of the journey on March 26, 1839, the suffering of the Cherokees never ended. The trail of the exiles was a trail of death. They had to sleep in the wagons and on the ground without fire. And I have known as many as 22 of them to die in one night of pneumonia due to ill treatment, cold, and exposure. Among this number was the beautiful Christian wife of Chief John Ross. This noble-hearted woman died giving her only blanket for the protection of a sick child. She rode thinly clad through a blinding sleet and snowstorm, developed pneumonia, and died in the still hours of a bleak winter night. The sick child lived, but Mrs. Ross is sleeping in an unmarked grave far from her native Smoky Mountain home. The long, painful journey to the west ended March 26, 1839, with 4,000 silent graves reaching from the foothills of the Smoky Mountains to what is known as Indian Territory in the west. Now it is 1890, and the true facts of this enormous crime are being hidden from the young people of today. School children do not know that we are living on lands that were taken from a helpless race to satisfy the white man's greed. Future generations will read and condemn this act. It is my hope that you will understand that privates, like myself, had no choice in this matter. We had to follow the orders of the officers. However, murder is murder, whether committed by the villain hiding in the dark or by men in uniform. Somebody must explain the streams of blood that flowed in the Indian country in the summer of 1838. Somebody must explain the 4,000 silent graves that mark the western trail of the Cherokees. I wish I could forget it all, but the picture of 645 wagons slowly moving over the frozen ground with the suffering Indians still lingers in my memory. Let the historian of a future day tell the sad story with its tears and sounds of the dying. Let the great judge of all the earth weigh our actions and reward us according to our work. Children, thus ends my promised birthday story, this December 11th, 1890. All right, are there any questions about the source? Anything that confused you or you didn't understand? All right, so on the second reading, we're not going to go through the whole thing. I'm going to highlight a couple of paragraphs, and what I want you to do as I'm reading is to underline or highlight any passages that show specific hardships that the Cherokee faced. Okay, so not just the things that were bad. The whole thing is bad, right? All of this was hardships of the Cherokee. But what I want you to look for on this second reading are the specific things that happened. Okay, so we're looking for details. And you can underline, you can highlight, put a star next to it, whatever works for you. Okay? We are going to start this time about halfway through the second paragraph. Okay, so we're not going to read sort of the intro and conclusion. We'll just go to the meat of the letter. I saw the helpless Cherokees arrested, dragged from their homes, and in the chill of a drizzling rain on an October morning, I saw them loaded like cattle into 645 wagons and started on a terrible journey west. Chief John Ross prayed, and when the bugle sounded, the wagons started rolling, as many of the children rose to their feet and waved their little hands goodbye to their mountain homes, knowing they were leaving them forever. Many of these helpless people did not have blankets, and many of them had been driven from home barefooted. On the morning of November 17th, we drove through a terrific sleet and snowstorm with freezing temperatures, and from that day until we reached the end of the journey on March 26, 1939, the suffering of the Cherokees never ended. The trail of the exiles was a trail of death. They had to sleep in the wagons and on the ground without fire. And I have known as many as 22 of them to die in one night of pneumonia due to ill treatment, cold, and exposure. Among this number was the beautiful Christian wife of Chief John Ross. This noble-hearted woman died giving her only blanket for the protection of a sick child. She rode thinly clad through a blinding sleet and snowstorm, developed pneumonia, and died in the still hours of a bleak winter night. The sick child lived, but Mrs. Ross is sleeping in an unmarked grave, far from her native Smoky Mountain home. The long, painful journey to the west ended March 26, 1839, with 4,000 silent graves reaching from the foothills of the Smoky Mountains to what is known as Indian Territory in the west. Now it is 1890, and the true facts of this enormous crime are being hidden from the young people of today. School children do not know that we are living on lands that were taken from a helpless race to satisfy the white man's greed. All right, so like he's saying there at the end of the reading, people don't know that this happened. And that's a shame, right? This was one of the biggest crimes of the U.S. government against its own people, against Native Americans. Okay, the people that were in this land before any Americans were. So it's a real shame that people wouldn't know about this, like what Private Burnett is saying. So what we're going to do now is we're going to explain the Trail of Tears to somebody. Okay, we're going to create a memorial to the Trail of Tears, but not with words. Okay, we don't want to just use words. We want to use images, symbols, pictures, so that anybody could understand, because we don't want to have this situation where people don't know that this happened. Okay? So what you're going to do in your group is you're going to look at those passages that you underlined or highlighted, and you're going to choose one or two of them, and you're going to transform that passage into a memorial to the victims of the Trail of Tears. Now you can just choose part of a sentence, a whole paragraph, whatever you want to do, okay? But you're going to design and draw the memorial on your butcher paper, and at the end of class, you're going to present it and explain how it connects to this primary source. So you'll be telling us which part of the source you used to create this memorial. Your memorial can be very literal or very figurative, but it should not include more than 5 words. Okay, so the point is to show what happened without using words. Alright, so let's look at some examples of memorials. Okay, this is a memorial to victims of the Holocaust. Alright, and it is very literal, right? You have an actual figure of a person and a barbed wire fence. This one is very figurative. Okay, it doesn't really look like much of anything, but it's very disorienting when you stand in it, and it's supposed to make you feel uneasy. Okay, so this is a literal example. This is a figurative example. Looking at the civil rights movement, this is a figurative example, and you can see that this is a non-linguistic representation, which is what we're doing today. It's pulling from the quote, "Until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream," and it's actually water, okay? So that's a literal, a figurative representation pulling from that quote. And then this is a literal representation in our own Kelly Ingram Park in downtown Birmingham, taken from an actual event. Okay? Are there any questions about memorials, about how to represent words with images? This is a really good example of a memorial that takes some words and turns them into something that you can see and feel and touch, which is what we're trying to do. Okay, so what you are going to do, step 1, you need to choose the passage that you're going to use. And then step 2, decide how you would represent that passage with a memorial. Okay, are there any questions about that? So the first thing you're doing is choosing a passage to represent from what you underlined and highlighted. Okay, we're going to take 15 minutes for you to create your memorial. It does not have to be pretty. Alright, it's the idea behind it rather than the skill of your drawing. Okay, I'm going to come around and check on you. Go ahead and get to work.
Okay, so basically, I'll
do maybe we could represent
beside a trail. And then we're gonna have March grade beside.
What you think if we draw like a woman that should be trying to give like children like blankets?
So did that story really stand out to you, Jihan?
Yeah, because there says that the woman, she gave like the sick child blanket so it can
Go.
Yeah. And the child lived and she didn't. So she basically sacrificed her life for the child.
Yeah, exactly.
So that would be a pretty powerful thing to represent with the memorial. Do y'all agree? Okay. Well, if that's the passage you want to use, y'all can go ahead and start thinking about how you would represent that. It can be, remember, very literal. It could be a woman, or it can be like symbolic or figurative. So I'm going to let y'all think on that, okay, and I'll check on you here in a minute. So which passage stood out to y'all?
Okay, just keep going, keep going. The one about like how the sick child died, but the woman died and like she's in an unmarked grave, and the one with the 4,000 silent graves.
But we could do 5 graves. The one with Miss R, and then the 4
I like that. I like how you pulled those two passages together. That's really neat. From different parts of the story, but very related. So how are you going to represent that, you think?
The black. Just do have
I was thinking we could do like a trail, and then like a rocky path, and then with trees on either side, and then like graves. Just like the sticks, maybe sticks on them.
Okay, I think that's fantastic. You have any thoughts? You agree? Awesome. All right. Good deal. That sounds great. I'll come check on y'all again in a minute. I think it's a great idea. All right, so y'all have gotten going. So which passage are y'all pulling from? Okay, so what are you designing?
Okay, we're drawing like, we're having a trail, and then we're gonna have like the people on the trail, and then we're gonna have a bunch of unmarked graves around it. So like, it describes the pain and all of the graves.
Right.
So yeah.
Okay, awesome. So what are the X's? Those are the graves.
But
Okay.
then you know, like crosses with the
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm with you. Here, I just need to look at it that way. Now I see it. Okay. I was looking at it from the wrong way. Good job, y'all. Keep it up. Okay, so which passage did y'all choose? Okay. So the people that died from pneumonia?
Y'all ain't never.
kind of more specific. They had to wrap it so
Okay.
the crosses. Was
Okay, so how are you going to represent that?
We're gonna have like a soldier.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. What do you think, Sam?
Somebody draw a card.
All right. Good deal. I'll leave you to it, and I'm going to check on you in a minute. This is looking good, guys. Now keep it up.
You can have pneumonia.
All right, so we've all got markers, so if we can have multiple people working at a time, it will probably get done faster. That looks really good, Zariah. Keep it up.
You can draw like a wagon background or something.
I have one about fire, pneumonia, and cold.
Has like a red color, right? And then like that.
We all got to draw. Remember, it's not the beauty of the drawing, it's the ideas behind it.
Why am I the one like, you don't have to have it? What? It's true.
Okay, so what is this going to be? All right.
Ouch.
You okay?
Yeah.
Okay, and they, oh yeah, they had like some, kind of like some seat thingies.
Yeah, they got the seat thing like right here now.
Put a window right there.
There ain't no windows in the way.
But then they had like some little,
Oh, it's just okay.
yeah, like they had an opening in the back. And then,
It's just like a handle and like people inside.
You can draw
Like
horses.
you can draw like stick people.
They have
Yeah.
horses.
They had cattle.
oxen or something like that?
Yeah, they had cattle.
Okay.
Well, let's look back at this horse. So there was a mention of cattle, but did they say that they had cattle?
Like cattle.
Yeah, so they were loading the people like cattle into the wagons. Now, they did have cattle with them. They took their livestock with them to the west. But then you also have the people that were loaded like cattle into the wagons. Now, that doesn't mean you can't use a wagon, though. Because we have mention of that, but you need to make sure that the way you're representing that is that the people were in the wagons. But I think you're doing great. You're on the right track, for sure.
Move the wagons. I would guess.
Like
Horses or oxen?
Yeah, I would think of oxen.
Go for it. You have to draw that.
So y'all's is like a real trail that's out in the woods, right? Yeah.
Well, yeah, we'll have it in the gray.
Yeah. Awesome.
No, we need a green one.
Okay, so this is Miss Ross, right? Oh, this is the baby, and this is Miss Ross. Okay, very good. And then what's happening over here?
This is just a wagon.
Okay, good. That's awesome.
Do it how they do it. It just sounds like he's yelling.
Keep an eye on your time. Y'all are all doing great.
Oh, we got everything. Oh, we got everything.
So, do we have to like mark them?
Yeah. Don't judge
Hey, Grissom, you wanna give me a green, buddy?
Yep.
Okay, so y'all said like an actual trail that would be somewhere, right? That's really neat. Why did y'all decide to do it like that?
It was Mia's idea.
Why did Mia decide to do it like that?
Because they kept talking about a trail, and it's called the Trail of Tears.
Right. So what would be the benefit for somebody if they were walking on this trail? Rather than if they just saw a picture of it, like what would be the benefit of actually walking on it?
Oh yeah, they can see how it, like what happened, how it was for them.
Yeah. Because y'all, I know that y'all done some simulations before, right? In 6th grade, y'all did that immigration simulation. Were any of y'all here in 6th grade? Yeah.
I forgot how
I think that's a great wagon. I think that's very good. Yeah, you're doing a good job.
Huh? Are you in art?
So they're like more, we can take a bunch of really
Okay, so who do we have here?
I'm kind of representing Miss Ross.
Okay. Good. And then who is this about to be?
a soldier.
Okay. Oh, that's right, because y'all have there's going to be the fire.
Yeah, she doesn't.
Very good, very good. Sam, tell me more about the fire. Why'd y'all decide to do that?
Well, I mean, it kind of represents a safe haven in a way. And like, it's just they're taking the land and it's also more problems. So,
Well, if they had the fire, then maybe they wouldn't have died, right? They might not have gotten sick and died. So that was just one more blow to their chances of surviving that they didn't have the fire. Good.
Yeah, right.
I don't think they would walk on
So what are y'all putting on your trail?
like a little stick on the grave and things because they didn't have like actual stone graves.
Gotcha.
So they have like little sticks representing.
So what that reminds me of is something that's all over Europe that are called stumbling stones. And you can have a stumbling stone put at your house if you do the proper research. But basically, they are raised up stones in the street, and they represent the last place the person that was victim of the Holocaust lived or worked. And so if it was a house, you could have a stumbling stone and it has the names of those family members. And the whole point is that as you're walking, you kind of stumble it and you look at it and it makes you think about it. And that's kind of what the sticks make me think of is if you were walking, you would be, you'd have to make sure that you weren't stepping on them or weren't tripping over them. And it would really make you think about each of those was
stumbling sticks.
a stumbling stick. Yeah.
Sticks, but same thing.
Yeah. So that's really
that works perfectly with that idea.
It does, yeah. I mean, it really made me think of the stumbling stones.
So we might take that idea.
Yeah, I think that's great.
I went 185.
Less than 5 minutes left. Okay, so it looks like I might be getting finished things. When y'all are done, like on the bottom of one of your papers, I want you to make sure that you can answer those 2 questions, okay? So like, basically, what details of the Trail of Tears does your memorial show?
Sad face.
So what would this be teaching somebody about the Trail of Tears? If if they came and saw your memorial, and then what passage are you going to learn? And if you just want to make sure that that passage is highlighted and that you can point to it, you don't have to copy it back out. But, you know, you've got lots of different highlights, so just make sure that you can point to that specific passage.
That's what I was saying. You start going to.
Like a white marker.
Very good. So why did you draw snow?
Why did you put in?
Yep, exactly. They talked about that it started in October and went all the way through March. So, you know, even if it's the southeast, it's still the winter time. It's a little better than the heat on at my house right now.
Same difference.
It's getting a little bit cold, right? Yes.
What do trails look like?
Like how it was.
There's no rules. I think we should do like a.
Yeah.
Like an
Well,
actual.
I just go ahead and
Trail
Maybe that's just.
That's road pattern.
No.
Either way is great. Either way is great. Well, here, let's take it back to the source. Do you think that it would have been paved, the road that they went on?
No.
Probably not, right?
A big bumpy.
Yeah, so why you doing?
Okay, I'll make it right.
Yes, it would have been really bumpy if it even was a road, right? We didn't have very many marked roads throughout the southeast at that point.
How to whack him off the.
Okay, so as y'all are finishing up, there's 2 questions on the board that you need to be able to answer when you present in class. Okay? And it's what details of the Trail of Tears does this show? So basically, if somebody came to this memorial to learn about the Trail of Tears, what would they learn? And then which passage are you pointing to? And you don't have to rewrite the passage, but make sure that you can say it's this one right here and read it. You know, so you've got lots of underlines and things like that. Maybe go back in a different color.
Are we gonna read the passage?
Yes. Yeah, so you need to be able to say this one is the passage that we used. Okay, so guys, as y'all are finishing up, make sure that you'll be able to answer those 2 questions that are on the board. So if somebody came to learn about the Trail of Tears from your memorial, what would they learn?
The whole passage or
And
just
then which passage did you use?
Maybe it's just the part that we.
To create your memorial, okay?
I was kind of thinking.
I have no desire. I'm not.
Yeah, wait, you need to have some kind of like climbing up a Oh, wait, walking too.
Very good. Good job. You should. You have lots of details from yesterday's notes. That's awesome. Okay, so guys, as y'all are finishing up, there's 2 questions that are on the board, and that's what you're going to be telling us about when we present these. Okay, it's basically what would somebody learn from this memorial if they came to learn about the Trail of Tears, and then which passage did you pull from? All right, be putting your finishing touches, guys. Remember, it doesn't have to be beautiful. It's the idea behind it. And stop.
Okay.
All right. These all look fantastic. Pencils and markers down. Sorry. It looks great. Here, yeah, you can finish. There you go. Perfect. Okay. So we're going to present these pretty informally, okay? You don't have to stand up at the front. You can just show it to us. But you're going to tell us which passage from the primary source you used to create this secondary source. Because that's what you have created, right? Is something that you used, a primary source, to create this body of knowledge that somebody else could use to learn about the Trail of Tears. So when you present, you're going to read the passage that you used to us, and then tell us how it is that your memorial represents that passage. Okay? So I'm going to have y'all go first. I will hold it. And please read the passage to your classmates. Go ahead.
The trail of the exiles was a trail of death. They had to sleep in the wagons and on the ground without fire. And I have known as many as 22 of them to die in one night of pneumonia due to ill treatment, cold, and exposure.
Okay, so how does your memorial show that passage?
We have the soldier and he's holding the fire and they're asking for the fire. And they're also crying, which is like a puddle of tears. And then there's a wagon over there, which they're sleeping in. And they're wearing like the colors of the fire too, to show that it's like a safe haven for them.
Okay, so what does it symbolize that the soldier has the fire but they don't?
It just symbolizes how they were really treated by the soldiers.
Okay, and what might have happened if they had the fire? Because you talked about that so many of them died, right?
From pneumonia and exposure.
Yeah. So that was one of the reasons that so many people died, is that they didn't have fire, they didn't have warmth and blankets and things like that. Okay? All right, great job for this group, okay? One of y'all, please read us the passage.
We picked the same passage.
Pick the same passage? Okay, let's just read it again, just for fun.
The trail of the exiles was a trail of death. They had to sleep in the wagons and on the ground without fire, and I have known as many as 22 of them to die in one night of pneumonia due to ill treatment, cold, and exposure. Among this number was the beautiful Christian wife of Chief John Ross. This noble-hearted woman died, giving her only blanket for the protection of a sick child. She rode thinly clad through a blinding sleet and snowstorm, developed pneumonia, and died in the still hours of a bleak winter night. The sick child lived, but Miss Ross is sleeping in an unmarked grave far from her native Smoky Mountain home.
Okay, so explain to us how the memorial shows that passage.
We have a wagon, and you can't really see it, but there's like snow under it, and there's snow falling. There's like a moon for the night.
Okay, and then who do we have here?
Miss Ross and the baby and the baby.
Okay. I think that a lot of y'all really liked